The precision of a plane's takeoff is fun to watch until something goes terribly wrong. These takeoff failures caught on camera reveal the terrifying moments when control is lost, engines fail, or critical mistakes turn into disaster. From fiery crashes to miraculous escapes, each incident shows just how disastrous things can go in seconds. What causes these catastrophic failures, and how do pilots react in these life or death scenarios? Join us as we explore these shocking takeoff tragedies. Number 20. American Airlines Flight 587. It was a regular day on November 12, 2001, when American Airlines Flight 587 took off from John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City. The plane, an Airbus A300 model, was headed to Las Americas Airport in the Dominican Republic. On board were 251 passengers and 9 crew members. Things seemed normal until shortly after takeoff, when the plane hit turbulence caused by another aircraft, a Japan Airlines Boeing 747, which had taken off just a few minutes earlier. The co-pilot, Sten Molen, tried to correct the situation by adjusting the plane's rudder, but he reacted too strongly. This caused the vertical stabilizer, which helps steer the plane, to break off completely. Without it, the plane spun out of control. The forces were so intense that both engines ripped away from the wings. Tragically, the plane crashed into a neighborhood in Queens, New York, taking the life of all 260 people on board and 5 people on the ground. The crash happened just a few miles from the site of the World Trade Center attacks, causing immediate fears of another terrorist event. But after investigating, the National Transportation Safety Board found it wasn't terrorism. Instead, it was determined to be a mistake made by the pilot. Even though the tragedy was devastating, another flight mishap around this time showed how technical malfunctions could also lead to dangerous situations. Number 19. The fatal Japan Airlines flight. Japan has also faced its share of tragic airplane accidents, including one of the worst ever recorded. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123, a Boeing 747 SR-46, met a devastating fate. The plane, with registration JA8119, was on a domestic trip from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka International Airport. On board were 509 passengers and 15 crew members. Not long after taking off, a major problem happened. The rear pressure bulkhead, a critical part of the aircraft, failed. This issue traced back to poor repairs made 7 years earlier after the plane's tail had been damaged during a previous flight. The faulty fix led to sudden decompression, causing the plane's vertical stabilizer to break off. Without that stabilizer, it became extremely hard to control the plane. Captain Masami Takahama and First Officer Yutaka Sasaki did their best to manage the situation, but the aircraft became nearly impossible to steer. Sadly, the plane crashed into Mount Takamagahara in the Gunma Prefecture, sparking a massive fire. It was a heartbreaking disaster. 520 people lost their lives, making it the deadliest single-plane crash in history. Remarkably, 4 passengers survived, although they were seriously hurt. Number 18. Emory Worldwide Airlines Tragedy. Another heartbreaking crash happened with Emory Worldwide Airlines Flight 17, a McDonnell Douglas DC-8 cargo plane, on February 16, 2000. The plane, known as N8079U, was flying from Reno, Nevada to Dayton, Ohio, with a planned stop at Sacramento Mather Airport in California. The crew included Captain Kevin Stables, First Officer George Land, and Flight Engineer Russell Hicks. Right after takeoff from Sacramento, the crew noticed something was wrong. They reported having trouble controlling the plane's pitch, which is how the aircraft tilts up and down. Despite trying hard to turn back and land safely, the plane crashed into a car salvage yard nearby. Sadly, none of the 3 crew members survived the crash. Investigators found that a part called the right elevator control tab had come loose because it hadn't been secured properly during maintenance. The bolt used to attach it wasn't inspected as it should have been. Without this crucial control part working, the crew couldn't keep the plane steady, leading to the tragic accident. Number 17. Crash of TAM Airlines, Flight 402. Tower control caught TAM Airlines Flight 402 on camera facing a tragic end on October 31, 1996. The plane, a Fokker 100, was leaving Congonhas Airport in São Paulo, Brazil, heading to Santos Dumont Airport in Rio de Janeiro. Shortly after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. A system called the thrust reverser on the right engine, which is normally used to slow the plane during landing, activated by mistake. This caused the plane to push unevenly, making it hard for the pilots to keep control. Captain José Antonio Moreno and First Officer Paulo Roberto de Oliveira did everything they could to fix the problem, but the plane began tilting to the right and quickly lost altitude. Despite their efforts, it crashed into a neighborhood near the airport. All 95 people on board and 4 people on the ground lost their lives. What caused the crash was a faulty part called a micro switch, and poor maintenance were to blame for the reverser activating. But airplane crash stories caught on camera don't end there. The next tragedy claimed the lives of many, leaving behind a few survivors. However, the events surrounding this crash are both harrowing and chilling. Number 16. Spanair Flight Crash. It was a bright and sunny day on August 20th, 2008, when Spanair Flight 5022 faced an unexpected disaster. The plane, a McDonnell Douglas MD-82, was set to fly from Madrid Barajas Airport in Spain to Gran Canaria Airport in the Canary Islands. On board were 166 passengers and 6 crew members. As the plane sped down the runway for takeoff, something went wrong. It couldn't climb high enough and crashed shortly after lifting off. Later, investigators found that parts of the plane called flaps and slats, which help create lift during takeoff, hadn't been set properly. Neither Captain Antonio Garcia Luna nor First Officer Francisco Javier Muley knew this because a warning system meant to alert them wasn't working. The plane skidded off the runway, hit the ground hard, and broke apart, catching fire in the process. The crash claimed the lives of 154 people. Only 18 survived, and they suffered severe injuries and burns. The investigation by Spain's Civil Aviation Accident and Incident Investigation Commission revealed that the failure to deploy the flaps and slats, along with the faulty warning system, were the main reasons behind the tragic accident. Number 15. National Airlines Flight Plummets. National Airlines Flight 102, a Boeing 747-400 BCF cargo plane, took off from Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan on April 29, 2013. The plane, registered as N949CA, was headed for Al Maktoum International Airport in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. It was operated by National Air Cargo and carried 5 large military vehicles as cargo. Not long after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. The heavy cargo wasn't secured properly, and during the climb, it shifted. This caused a major imbalance in the plane's center of gravity. The aircraft suddenly pitched up too steeply, lost control, stalled, and then crashed near the runway. A dashboard camera in a nearby vehicle captured the tragic scene, showing the plane's sharp climb, stall, and crash. Sadly, all 7 crew members on board, including the captain, first officer, and 5 others, lost their lives. Crash investigators concluded that the main cause of the crash was the cargo not being secured correctly. The incident underscored how crucial it is to load and secure cargo properly to keep flights safe. Number 14. Midair explosion of TWA Flight 800. TWA Flight 800, a Boeing 747-131, met one of the worst fates possible on July 17, 1996. The plane, with registration N93119, was flying from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, France. On board were 212 passengers and 18 crew members. Shortly after takeoff, As the plane climbed to reach cruising altitude, disaster struck. There was a massive explosion in the center wing fuel tank. The force of the blast tore the plane apart mid-air, sending debris crashing into the Atlantic Ocean near Long Island, New York. Tragically, all 230 people on board lost their lives. The National Transportation Safety Board spent a long time investigating what caused this tragedy. They concluded that a short circuit had ignited a flammable mix of fuel and air in the fuel tank. Even though they couldn't pinpoint the exact cause of the short circuit, they suspected it had something to do with the aircraft's wiring. Number 13. The preventable crash of Air Ontario Flight. On a chilly spring day, March 10, 1989, Air Ontario Flight 1363, a Fokker F-28-1000 Fellowship, faced a tragic accident. The plane was taking off from Dryden Regional Airport in Ontario, Canada, heading to Winnipeg, Manitoba. On board were 65 passengers and 4 crew members. The trouble began with delays on the ground, because several flights were ahead of them. Snow and ice built up on the wings during this waiting period. Even though the weather was rough, Captain George Morwood and First Officer Keith Mills decided to take off without de-icing the aircraft. As the plane sped down the runway, the snow and ice on the wings stopped the airflow from moving smoothly. This made it hard for the plane to lift off properly. It struggled to rise but didn't gain enough height, crashing into trees at the end of the runway. The crash caused a fire, and sadly, 24 passengers and 2 crew members lost their lives. 43 passengers and 2 crew members survived, though many were badly hurt. When investigators from the Canadian Aviation Safety Board looked into the crash, they found that the decision not to de-ice the plane was a key reason for the disaster. They also pointed out problems with how the airline handled its operations, which added to the dangers. This next crash serves as a stark reminder that even being the captain of an aircraft doesn't make you immune to errors or mistakes that can tragically cost lives. Number 12. Korean Air Cargo Flight. On December 22, 1999, Korean Air Cargo Flight 8509, a Boeing 747 cargo plane, faced a tragic accident. The plane, identified as HL7451, was set to travel from London Stansted Airport to Milan Malpensa Airport. The crew included Captain Park Duk-kyu, First Officer Yoon Ki-sik, Flight Engineer Park Hoon-kyu, and Kim Il-suk, a maintenance mechanic. The trouble began when a navigation system called the Inertial Navigation Unit stopped working properly. It gave the captain's display wrong information about the plane's position. Even though the first officer and a backup system showed the correct data, the captain's screen continued showing errors. This problem had already been noticed during an earlier flight from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, but it wasn't fully fixed before the plane left Stansted. After takeoff, the captain relied on the faulty information, which led to poor decisions while flying. The first officer and flight engineer couldn't correct the captain's mistakes in time. The plane climbed to around 1,400 feet, but started turning sharply to the left. It quickly lost control and crashed into Hatfield Forest near the village of Great Hallingbury. Sadly, all 4 crew members lost their lives. Investigators later found that the crew's inability to work together effectively and the failure to fix the faulty equipment were major reasons for the accident. Number 11. The brutal end of Singapore Airlines Flight 006. Singapore Airlines Flight 006 met a tragic end on October 31, 2000. The plane, a Boeing 747 registered as 9VSPK, was flying from Singapore's Changi Airport to Los Angeles International Airport with a stop in Taiwan. On board were 159 passengers and 20 crew members. At Taiwan's Taoyuan Airport, heavy rain and strong winds from Typhoon Zhangsain made visibility poor. As the crew, led by Captain Fung Chi Kong, First Officer Latif Cyrano, and relief pilot Ng Keng Leng prepared for takeoff, they unknowingly moved onto a closed runway under construction instead of the active one. During takeoff, the plane struck construction equipment and debris on the closed runway. The impact caused it to break apart and catch fire. Sadly, 83 passengers and crew members did not survive, while 96 others were rescued, many with serious injuries. Authorities found that the main cause of the accident was the crew's mistake in not checking the runway properly. Poor visibility, along with unclear airport signs and lights, made the situation even worse. Number 10. Rough landing of Delta Airlines flight. We're halfway through, and this next one is a doozy. Delta Airlines Flight 191 was a Lockheed L1011 TriStar that tragically crashed on August 2, 1985. The plane, registered as N726 Delta, was flying a domestic route from Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport in Florida to Los Angeles International Airport, with a stop in Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport in Texas. On board were 152 passengers and 11 crew members. As the plane approached Dallas-Fort Worth, it encountered a strong thunderstorm. The aircraft flew right into a microburst, which is a sudden and intense downward wind that causes a rapid loss of altitude. The pilots, Captain Edward Connors, First Officer Rudolph Price, and Flight Engineer Nick Nasick, tried hard to regain control of the aircraft. Despite their best efforts, the plane crashed a mile short of the runway, bounced, and then hit a water tank. The impact caused the aircraft to break apart and burst into flames. Tragically, 137 people lost their lives, including one person on the ground. However, 27 passengers and crew members survived, many with severe injuries. Although some made it out alive, their lives were forever changed by the horrific experience. Number 9. The miraculous survival of United Airlines Flight. United Airlines Flight 232 was a McDonnell Douglas DC-1010 that experienced a catastrophic failure on July 19, 1989. The plane, registered as N1819 uniform, was flying a scheduled domestic passenger route from Stapleton International Airport in Denver, Colorado, to Philadelphia International Airport, with a stop at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. On board were 285 passengers and 11 crew members. During the flight, one of the aircraft's tail-mounted engines failed, causing a complete loss of hydraulic fluid. Without hydraulic control, the pilots couldn't use the normal flight controls to steer the plane. The crew, led by Captain Alfred C. Haynes, First Officer William R. Records, and Flight Engineer Dudley J. Dvorak, worked together to manage the emergency. Even though they lost control of the hydraulics, the crew used the power from the remaining engines to help steer the plane. They made an attempt to land at Sioux Gateway Airport in Sioux City, Iowa. As they got closer to the runway, it was clear that landing safely would be very difficult. The plane touched down, but without proper control, it cartwheeled and broke apart on impact. Tragically, 111 people lost their lives, but incredibly, 185 passengers and crew members survived, many with serious injuries. This incident, like the next, is an example of what can only be called a miracle for the survivors. Number 8. Crash landing. The British Airways flight. In the middle of January 2008, British Airways Flight 38 had a day no one on board will ever forget. The plane, a Boeing 777 with the registration GYMMM, was flying from Beijing in China to London Heathrow Airport in the United Kingdom. It carried 136 passengers and 16 crew members. Everything was smooth until the plane got close to Heathrow. Out of nowhere, both engines lost power. The pilots, Captain Peter Burkle and First Officer John Coward, tried to give the engines more thrust, but nothing happened. The jet started dropping fast, and before anyone could react, it crash-landed on the grass just short of the runway. It skidded along until it stopped, the nose gear crushed under the weight. Even though it was a terrifying crash, no one lost their life. 47 passengers were hurt, but only one had a serious injury. Thanks to the quick actions of the crew and rescue teams, everyone got out safely. When experts investigated what happened, they discovered that ice crystals had formed in the fuel system during the flight. These ice bits blocked fuel from reaching the engines, which was why they lost power at the worst possible time. Number 7. AANA Airlines Flight 214. In the summer of 2013, something went wrong during a routine flight from South Korea to San Francisco. AANA Airlines Flight 214, a Boeing 777, was making its final approach to the San Francisco airport on July 6 when disaster struck. The plane, identified as HL-7742, had 291 passengers and 16 crew members on board. Everything seemed fine at first, but as the jet neared the runway, it became clear that the pilots weren't flying high enough or fast enough. Captain Lee Kang-kook, who was still learning to fly this type of plane, was in control while his instructor, Captain Lee Jong-min, was supervising. Somehow, they didn't manage to keep the jet on the right path. The tail ended up hitting a seawall before the runway, which caused the plane to twist and break apart. A fire broke out after the crash, and the scene quickly turned chaotic. Sadly, 3 people died, and 187 others got hurt, some very badly. Thanks to the bravery of the flight attendants and fast action from rescue teams, most passengers made it out alive. When investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board looked into what happened, they found that the pilots didn't keep an eye on the speed and glide path like they should have. They were also relying too much on the plane's automatic systems, which made things even more complicated during the landing. Number 6. The sorry end of the Concorde. In July 2000, Air France Flight 4590, a sleek Concorde jet registered as FBTSC, was headed from Paris to New York City on a charter trip. On board were 100 passengers and 9 crew members. As the plane sped down the runway at Charles de Gaulle Airport, it ran over a piece of metal lying on the ground. This metal had fallen off another plane, a Continental Airlines DC-10, that had taken off earlier. When the Concorde's tire hit the debris, the tire burst, sending chunks flying into the underside of the wing. One of those pieces punched a hole in the fuel tank, and leaking fuel caught fire. Despite their best efforts, the pilots, who were Captain Christian Marty, First Officer Jean Marceau, and Flight Engineer Gilles Jardinot, couldn't get the jet high enough or fast enough to avoid disaster. The plane lost control and crashed into a hotel in Gonesse, a town near the airport. Tragically, all 109 people on board lost their lives, along with 4 people on the ground. As usual, an investigation by aviation safety experts in France found that the crash happened because of the metal debris on the runway. This tragedy served as a harsh reminder of the need for careful runway inspections to keep planes safe. After the crash, the Concorde was eventually retired from commercial flights in 2003, marking the end of its era. Number 5. Catastrophic engine failure of Southwest Airlines flight. The spring morning of April 2018, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 took off from New York, heading to Dallas with 144 passengers and 5 crew members. The plane, a Boeing 737 registered as N772SW, seemed ready for a smooth trip. But things changed fast. During the flight, something went terribly wrong with the left engine. It broke apart, sending pieces flying toward the plane. One of those hit the side and shattered a window. The sudden loss of pressure in the cabin made everything chaotic. Captain Tammy Jo Schultz and First Officer Darren Ellisor quickly put on their oxygen masks and began an emergency descent. Sadly, a passenger named Jennifer Reardon was pulled partway out through the broken window. Fellow passengers and flight attendants tried their best to pull her back inside and help her, but her injuries were too severe, and she did not survive. Even with all the damage, Captain Schultz and First Officer Ellisor stayed calm and managed to land the plane safely at the Philadelphia airport. Their quick thinking and skill were praised for saving so many lives that day. Investigators later found out that a fan blade in the engine had broken because of metal fatigue, causing the whole problem. It was a reminder that even careful inspections can sometimes miss these hidden dangers. But accidents like this aren't just limited to passenger flights. Military planes face risks too, as we explore them closer to the finale. Number 4. Ejection seat saves the day. Not too long ago, in November 2021, the HMS Queen Elizabeth, the English Royal Navy's lead aircraft carrier, was stationed in the Mediterranean Sea. A pilot got ready to take off in a fighter jet worth 100 million pounds. He hit the throttle and headed straight for the ramp, but things didn't go as planned. The jet didn't pick up enough speed to get off the deck. There's an old saying in the military, lift is a gift, thrust is a must, and that day, thrust was nowhere to be found. Luckily, the pilot managed to eject just in time. His parachute deployed, and he safely drifted down before the jet sank to the bottom of the ocean. But ejector seats aren't just for modern pilots. They're a last resort for anyone when things go wrong in the air. An old-school American pilot flying a Grumman A6 Intruder knew that all too well. One day, something went wrong with his plane's engine. The tower kept telling him to climb, but the engine just wouldn't respond. When climb turned into eject, he and his co-pilot were launched sideways right out of the aircraft. Both landed safely in the water, but the sudden force of the ejection hit the pilot hard. The G-force compressed his spine so much that when they pulled him out of the ocean, he was an inch shorter than before. Number 3. Bird strike on Southwest Flight. Flying big airplanes through the sky makes it almost impossible to avoid birds every time. The Federal Aviation Administration says that more than 10,000 birds collide with planes every year. That comes to about 26 strikes each day. On New Year's Eve in 2011, Southwest Flight 3072 was getting ready to take off from Portland International Airport, also known as PDX. The crew and passengers were headed to Oakland, California at around 12:30 in the afternoon. Not long after the plane lifted off the ground, 2 birds flew past it. One unlucky bird got pulled right into the plane's right engine. By then, there was no stopping the plane's climb. The pilot had no choice but to continue flying, turn the aircraft around, and bring it back safely to PDX. Thankfully, there was no need for an emergency landing, and the plane taxied back to the gate without trouble. No one was hurt, though the bird strike caused a little damage to the right wing. The airline rescheduled the flight for 6 that evening. Some passengers made other travel plans, but about 100 decided to wait it out and stick with the rescheduled flight. Number 2. The catastrophic crash of Aeros Flight. December 20th in 2016 is a date folks in Puerto Carreño, Colombia will always remember. At about 5 in the evening local time, Aeros Flight 157 lifted off from the small Sherman Olano Airport, headed to El Dorado International Airport in Bogota. The Boeing 727 cargo plane carried roughly 20,000 pounds of goods and 6 crew members. Trouble hit right as the plane took off. It ran out of runway, broke through the airport's fence, and soared low over a crowd of plane watchers on the other side. These onlookers filmed as the pilots frantically worked to steady the aircraft, but things were already going downhill. The plane had lost its number 3 engine, all its hydraulic systems, and part of the landing gear. For 2 tense minutes, they fought to stay in the air before the plane clipped a tree and a guard post, rolled to the right, and slammed into the ground. The investigation revealed failures at many levels. First, the airport was simply too small for a plane that size. Then, the pilots made preventable mistakes, starting with improper takeoff procedures. They also didn't activate a backup system that might have saved the flight. However, one of the biggest errors fell on Aeros itself. The company had adjusted the plane to take off at slower speeds to save on fuel costs, but never updated the flight manual. When the pilots prepped for takeoff, they set their speed 5 knots too high. That seemingly small difference turned out to be the critical factor between a routine takeoff and a tragic accident. And now for the finale, we look at a true aviation hero and how his saving the day inspired even Hollywood. Number 1. The heroic landing of US Airways flight. On January 15, 2009, US Airways Flight 1549 took off from LaGuardia Airport in New York City. The plane was heading to Charlotte, North Carolina, carrying 2 pilots, 3 flight attendants, and 150 passengers. From there, it was supposed to continue to Seattle, Washington. Unfortunately, the Airbus A320 didn't get far, staying right in the Hudson Bay area. The pilot in charge was Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, who was 57 years old at the time. Before becoming a commercial pilot, Sully had been a fighter pilot in the US Air Force. By January of 2009, he had flown nearly 20,000 hours, making him one of the most experienced pilots in the sky. A flock of birds shouldn't have been a problem for someone like him, but things went differently that day. Shortly after takeoff, the plane hit a group of Canadian geese at around 2,800 feet. Feathers and bits of birds covered the windshield, while passengers heard the engines rumbling. Some even saw flames. Both engines shut down, and the plane began to lose altitude fast. Sully got on the radio and told air traffic control they had no power in either engine. The controller told him to turn back to LaGuardia, but Sully knew that wasn't possible. They suggested trying for New Jersey, but he realized he couldn't make that either. The safest choice was the Hudson River. The plane glided just 900 feet over the George Washington Bridge before landing on the river's surface. Within minutes, ferries arrived and helped get everyone to safety. Miraculously, the plane didn't break apart or sink. Because of their courage, Captain Sully and his crew were awarded the Master's Medal for Outstanding Achievement in Aviation. They even received a standing ovation at Super Bowl 43 and were later inducted into the International Air and Space Hall of Fame. In 2016, Clint Eastwood directed the movie Sully, with Tom Hanks playing the now famous pilot. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.